Controversial House Intelligence Committee memo is out, and we are waiting for President Trump to leave the White House any moment now. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. President Trump allowing the memo to go public, and it includes an allegation that an anti-Trump dossier played a key role in gaining a surveillance warrant against a Trump campaign advisor in 2016. Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace warning about how small the memo is.
There's nothing in there that is in any way endangers national security, may endanger the reputation of the FBI and some of its senior officials. This is in no way, shape, or form is a complete document. It's a very narrowly tailored memo about one specific incident, may be true, may be damaging, but I think it's limited in what it tells you about the entire investigation.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live on the North Lawn. John, what are the newsworthy points in the memo?
Well, the basic premise of all of this is that a FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page, who was a sometimes foreign policy advisor to the president, was based on false information, specifically that unverified dossier that was compiled by Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele. Let me illuminate for you, if I could, just what I think are a few of the crucial passages in this memo. First of all, quote, Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who resigned, by the way, from the FBI suddenly on Monday, testified before the Intelligence Committee in December 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court without the Steele dossier information. The memo goes on to say, neither the initial application in the October 2016 nor any of the renewals disclose or even reference the role of the DNC, the Clinton campaign, or any party campaign in funding Steele's efforts, even though the political origins of the Steele dossier were known to senior DOJ and FBI officials. So this all goes to the application for that warrant to surveil Carter Page, the memo written by Nunes and Gowdy basically saying that that was based on information that was contained in a dossier which has not been verified and in some circles certainly discredited. The memo goes on to say that after Christopher Steele was terminated, a source validation report conducted by an independent unit within the FBI assessed Steele's reporting as only minimally corroborated. Yet in early January 2017, Director James Comey briefed President-elect Trump on a summary of the Steele dossier, even though it was, according to his June 2017 testimony, salacious and unverified. Why this is interesting and important is that this dossier shows up in so many key points in this investigation. It was that meeting that Comey had with President-elect Donald Trump that was the foundation for the creation of the very first of those now famous memos memorializing Comey's interaction with the president that Comey wrote, which eventually led to the appointment of a special counsel. Remember, Jim Comey said at one point during his testimony he released those memos because he knew that it would prompt the appointment of a special counsel. The memo goes on to say, in September 2016, Christopher Steele admitted to Bruce Ohr, who was a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, his feelings against then-candidate Trump when Steele said he was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. The memo goes on to say, during the same period, Ohr's wife, Nellie, was employed by Fusion GPS to assist in the cultivation of opposition research on Trump, or later provided the FBI with all of his wife's opposition research paid for by the DNC and Clinton campaign via Fusion GPS. The Ohr's relationship with Steele and Fusion GPS was inexplicably concealed from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. This whole memo, Dana, is painting a picture that everything that led up to the initiation of the Russia investigation and ultimately the appointment of the special counsel really hinges on this unverified dossier, which that this memo suggests was unreliable, unverified, and was corroborated in part through what Catherine Herridge has pointed out is circular reporting that Christopher Steele, who compiled this dossier, fed information from it to news organizations who then wrote a story about it, and he said that's corroborating of my very own dossier. So we're not sure where this is going to go legally, but certainly politically, it will be fodder for a fairly wide discussion here, I think, in Washington.
Oh, indeed. And we have a guest coming up on the show that does question what could happen legally, and including something that might be welcome news to Paul Manafort. Before I let you go, tell me, is the president saying anything about this? And I understand that former FBI Director James Comey has decided to weigh in.
Yeah, the president weighed in the Oval Office just a short time ago. Let's listen to what he said.
I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that and you see that and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that.
So the president thinks it's a disgrace. Meanwhile, the former FBI director James Comey thinks it's a big nothing burger, tweeting, quote, "That's it? Dishonest and misleading memo wrecked the House Intel Committee, destroyed trust with intelligence community, damaged relationship with FISA court, and inexcusably exposed classified investigation of an American citizen. For what? DOJ and FBI must keep doing their jobs." That's just the tip of the iceberg of what we're hearing this afternoon, Dana.
It is. Well, TGIF, John. TGIF.
Yeah, FISA Friday now.
Indeed.
We've got Firing
Thank you.
Friday, Felony Friday, now FISA Friday.
Appreciate it. Thank you. President Trump was also asked about his deputy attorney general earlier after the memo was released.
Does it make you more likely to fire Rosenstein? Do you still have confidence in him after reading the memo?
You figure that one out.
James Trusty is a former Department of Justice prosecutor, and there's a lot to get to here. Let me start at the top, and I do want to finish with Rosenstein. What questions do you have that remain or that caught your eye when you read this? Because I'm wondering, how far up the food chain it went, knowingly concealing something from the court. That seems highly unusual for an FBI operation. Is that right?
Yeah, it is highly unusual, and that is the big question. I think that it's a memo, it's a summary memo, and so it's not going to give you all of the factual particulars that you want to be able to answer that question. But ultimately, there's at least a conclusion that a number of officials signed off on what turned out to be a false affidavit. That obviously has political consequences no matter what. But on the legal front, if you're representing somebody that was affected by these wiretaps, you're going to want to push very hard to figure out just how much bad faith was evident in this situation. It's the way you're going to challenge the admissibility of perhaps very important evidence is to establish the material omission by the agent who did the affidavit, and then figuring out just how much complicity there was above that agent.
In fact, Carter Page has already said he looks forward to working with his lawyers on reevaluating, and I believe that you think that Paul Manafort might also have that opportunity.
Well, it all depends on who's affected by the actual wiretaps, and I'm not privy to that, and I'm not sure anybody else is. So we're still left with a lot of speculation. But if there are intercepts over the course of those many months that are going to be used in court by a prosecution, then this motion almost writes itself for the defense to challenge it. Because the one way they ever get in trouble is either by lying or making a material misrepresentation. And I know a lot of FBI agents, I'm good friends with a lot of them, who would never do something like this, and that's what makes this all the more striking.
And in fact, that's one of the reasons that Speaker Paul Ryan was trying to very hard to say there's the rank and file is fine, they're good, they're solid, and President Trump said that today as well. But there is this question, and this memo is being seen as a bombshell by some. But you saw James Comey, the former Attorney General, FBI Director, just tweeting that it's really probably not that big a deal. But I want to ask you about something else, which is this question that John Roberts brought up about the corroboration of using the media to corroborate something to then present to the court. What do you think of that?
Right. That's really kind of a shocking thing. I was a prosecutor for 27 years. I looked at numerous affidavits, reviewed them all the time. I can't remember one that relied on media reporting for any aspect of this. And frankly, with the leaks that Comey made to the media, he's kind of the wrong person to scream about that. But again, relying on media seems crazy. The FBI has a lot of resources. They don't need to just read a newspaper and try to include that as a basis for probable cause. They can go out and investigate and interview the people themselves and have much more reliable information. I mean, not to suggest media ever gets anything wrong, but that reliance was very unusual.
Is it true that that when you go to the FISA judge that perhaps what you're presenting in this dossier might just be a small portion of the overall application, or and from this memo, do you think that they were mostly relying on the dossier?
Well, that's why I want to see the affidavits. I mean, again, they may not see daylight, but the real question there is how dependent were these affidavits on the dossier? If they're wholly or nearly wholly dependent on them, it's a real problem for the prosecution. But one thing related to that, Dana, just to keep in mind, the first version of the affidavit, the application package, is going to be very different than perhaps the third or fourth or fifth. What agents from the first instance presented to either Sally Yates or Rod Rosenstein, as well as the FBI counterparts, is going to look a lot different than the end because the case evolves. They might have more information from the wiretaps or more corroboration. So by the time Rod Rosenstein's signing off on something, it could look very different than that initial application, which again looks like willfully withheld very important information.
And perhaps that's what the Democrats are saying about when they were saying that it's incomplete. Take a listen to this. You mentioned Rod Rosenstein. He's the Deputy Attorney General. The New York Times writes this, that another option that Mr. Trump considered in discussions with his advisors was dismissing the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, and elevating the department's #3 official, Rachel Brand, to oversee Mr. Mueller. Mr. Rosenstein has overseen the investigation since March, when Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself. Yesterday, Speaker Paul Ryan said he had confidence in Rod Rosenstein. Today, the president said, "I'll let you figure that out." What do you think this means for Rod Rosenstein?
Right. Well, I'm not the one to divine the comments of the president, because it could change 6 more times by the time we get off the air. But look, it's not a shock to think that Rod is drawing fire from both the left and right. I know the guy pretty well, and I know he's a very professional, objective person, and I suspect there are still fair questions to ask, but I think I know the answers when it comes to Rod's motivation and Rod's competence. But he can be the most competent, squeaky clean guy to ever set foot in Washington. That doesn't mean he gets to hold on to his job, so we just have to wait and see.
That's right. He serves at the pleasure of the president, and either he will decide that the pressure is so much he would resign, or the president would fire him, or nothing could happen and he could remain in his job. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Makes sense.
All right. Well, I'm glad you thought so. James Trusty, we love having you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Some say the contents of the memo could be used to legitimize the dissolution of the Mueller probe. But my next guest says not so fast. As we are waiting for the president to leave the White House, we'll bring that to you live. The release of the House Intelligence Committee memo putting new scrutiny on Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein after it was revealed that an anti-Trump dossier played a vital role in securing a surveillance warrant against a Trump campaign advisor in 2016. Joining me now is Noah Rothman, associate editor at Commentary Magazine, and you've been following this closely for the last couple of weeks as we've been waiting for the release of the memo to actually happen. And now it is here. You made a point that originally we were supposed to find out a little bit more about unmasking.
Right.
Did you get anything out of this memo about that?
No, this has been completely lost in the fervor over this FISA warrant and the process by which the Trump campaign was surveilled. This whole thing started rolling when we learned that Mike Flynn and Jeff Sessions had been having conversations with Russians that they didn't admit to. Now, that claimed some scalps. But we have stopped talking about the extent to which we have violated the public trust by relating information that was secretive surveillance, to reporters in order to affect the political outcome. That's corruption, and that should be rooted out. But everybody seems to have forgotten about that in the fervor, in the haste to find something exculpatory for the Trump campaign in this Mueller investigation.
Well, but the fact that they say here that the source of the dossier, meaning the funding and also the author, so the funding coming from the DNC helping Hillary Clinton, and the source, Christopher Steele, admitting that he has an anti-Trump bias, but apparently that is withheld from the court when they go to ask for the warrant. Do you think that that is a material omission that will come back to hurt the Democrats.
It very well could be. I don't know the extent to which they had to reveal that information, but they probably should have, just in the interest of being forthright. But this thing was, they say that this was a core reason why they sought this warrant, not why they obtained it. It could have been a tip for all they know, and it could have been corroborated by other sources. Secondarily, this thing was renewed 3 separate times, so there had to be more PC justified by a federal judge in order to maintain this process, and Rod Rosenstein was responsible for that, and he's a Trump appointee. So the notion that this was a big conspiracy sort of falls apart there. And furthermore, we had in this memo, the very last paragraph of this memo that says this investigation began well before the FISA warrant was sought based on this dossier. It was the result of something that looks like New York Times reporting, which is that George Papadopoulos, a foreign policy advisor, began blabbing to Five Eyes member Australian officials about the extent of what the Russians have been surveilling on Hillary Clinton.
Take a listen to what Adam Schiff, he's the Democratic congressman that is the vice chair of the House Intel Committee. Listen to this.
There is no demonstration in this memo, in this misleading memo, of a systemic abuse at the FBI, as has been posited by the president and his allies. And instead, the majority, in the interest of transparency, only wants certain facts to be seen.
I talked to somebody who works in law enforcement who has to go through the application process to get a FISA judge to approve something, and he said if he had withheld information that he probably would have been fired. So perhaps shining a light on this might get us to the point where we actually have a better system, maybe, at the FBI. But also, I'm just curious where this goes in regards to the Mueller probe, because one thing we don't know, if you look at Manafort, for example, was his troubles directly related to any FISA warrant that was on Carter Page? That we don't know.
We don't know any of this, and a lot of people are being coy about the nature of the quote-unquote end game here, that there's some sort of a political action that can be taken, and the target of that action is the Mueller probe. Donald Trump Jr. takes to Twitter today, and he says, this all looks really terrible, this should be the game over moment. That doesn't seem to help anybody who's saying this is all about transparency, there's no political motive here, we just want to get to the bottom of things. I don't know what he's doing, but it seems to expose the extent to which they want a preferred outcome here, and the preferred outcome should be transparency, good governance, and that's been lost.
It all a down day on Wall Street. The Dow is down about 500 points so far. The drop is being linked to rising interest rates, this despite the economy adding 200,000 jobs last month. We'll keep you updated as the hour goes on. House Speaker Paul Ryan defending the release of the FISA memo, saying, quote, I also have serious concerns with the practice of using political documents funded by a candidate's political opponents to make law enforcement and counterintelligence decisions. Amid all the political rancor, we must be able to work together to ensure the FISA system works as intended and Americans' rights are properly safeguarded. I am glad that this memo helps to provide greater transparency, and I reiterate my support for the similar release of the minorities memo once it is properly scrubbed of all intelligence sources and methods. Chris Stirewalt is Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report. That's a very responsible statement from Speaker Paul Ryan, who's trying to keep everything really mellow here. But there's another one from the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. This just in. He says Congress has made inquiries concerning an issue of great importance for the country, and concerns have been raised about the department's performance. I have great confidence in the men and women of this department, but no department is perfect. Accordingly, I will forward to appropriate DOJ components all information I receive from Congress regarding this. I am determined that we will fully and ascertain the truth. Chris Stirewalt, I'll give you the floor.
Well, there's a lot of pencil shavings on the floor. Look, Ryan and Sessions there are taking the responsible, good governance route on this. You know, the memo reads like a defense lawyer arguing to impeach a witness or exclude evidence. And they're making it's argumentative more than it is revelatory. But there are revelations in it. There are important well, whether they're important or not, we'll find out. But there are significant revelations in it, it would seem, that relate to who applied for it. And as you and your guests have been talking about, there is news in there. But then there is a very, very serious allegation in there. And the very serious allegation against the Trump Justice Department, seemingly the president agrees with it based on his public statement about how troubling it is that his current attorney general, that the deputy attorney general, and that these are all his appointees, that this is ongoing or there is a continuing problem there, and that the problem relates to breaking the law, breaking the rules about how you get warrants. And that's a very serious allegation that Chairman Nunes has made here. But the problem for the Justice Department, the problem for Sessions is he can't defend himself. Nor can, now I think Ryan's right that in the long run, as all the Democrats, everything will be barfed out into the universe. All of everything's coming out.
We say released on this show.
I know, you guys are nicer, but it's all coming. And that's probably where this all ends. But you can see the Justice Department's complaint about this, and the reason what they're saying, if we take it in a light that gives them the benefit of the doubt, is, hey, look, we can't defend ourselves for this because the defense is secret itself.
Right. And in the meantime, the politics is what it is. I want to do two things for you. Let me tell you what the Washington Post editorial board said about Paul Ryan. He said that Mr. Ryan bears full responsibility for the deterioration of congressional oversight of intelligence operations. It is sad to see Mr. Ryan allow the reputation of the House to be tarnished this way. Now, what he would say is that the executive branch has a responsibility to do oversight. I'm sorry, the congressional branch has responsibility to oversight over the executive branch, and that is all he is doing. I do think one of the things that they failed to do is to establish this bright line that they said there was going to be between this memo that talks about possible abuses and the Mueller investigation. To me, those have been fully joined at this point.
100%. And the shaky bit for Ryan in all of this is that he wants a delineation between transparency, which he says will be made good on when the counter memo is released, and that as the Senate Judiciary and as other House committees are going to disgorge, I say, their interviews and all this stuff, it's all going to come out over time. And Ryan's saying that this will all go to greater transparency, and so he's betting on the come. He's saying it's going to get better later. But where he's got a problem is that obviously this is intended to impeach the investigation into the president and intended to impeach the investigation into his campaign. And there's no way around that.
I think that the Speaker would say that that was not his intention, but that is what is actually going to happen. This all happens as President Trump yesterday was talking about how the party is doing so well. If we could pull up the sound from him yesterday talking about the unification of the party. Play that, please.
Paul Ryan called me the other day, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I will say that he said to me he has never, ever seen the Republican Party so united, so much in like with each other. But literally the word united was the word he used. It's the most united he's ever seen the party, and I see it too. I have so many friends in this group, and there is a great coming together that I don't think either party has seen for many, many years.
Aside from this memo, I feel like President Trump has been able to unite the party because you don't see as much friction as you saw, for example, under Speaker Boehner and the House Freedom Caucus. I mean, we might see that in the coming months, but right now it does seem like they're all unified.
Well, just being in West Virginia will make people feel more happy and generous.
Indeed.
This is a well-known fact. Look, Boehner was doing something different. Boehner he was a lion tamer with a pistol and a chair and a whip, and he was trying to he was trying to fight with the element of the party that would end up getting Trump the nomination. So what you have is a capitulation to a certain degree in the Republican establishment, but you also have the willingness of the Trump supporters, of the populists inside the Republican Party, to accede to the wishes and demands of those folks when it comes to policy questions. So if the establishment folks are getting the policies that they want, and the populists are getting the fiery rhetoric and the stuff on the Russia investigation, then everybody can be happy for a while, as long as this, Republicans have to keep passing legislation. The day the House can't pass important bills, it's all kablooey.
All right, and I got to run. Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
Happy Friday.
President Trump leaving the White House just moments ago. We got a new statement from the press secretary on the Nunes memo, and we will bring that to you right after the break. Fox News alert, the White House weighing in on the release of the Nunes memo, the press office issuing a statement saying, quote, minority members of the committee have reportedly drafted a separate memorandum. The administration stands ready to work with Congress to accommodate oversight requests consistent with applicable standards, including the need to protect intelligence sources and methods. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry is here. That's exactly what Speaker Ryan had said as well, is that they are not saying that the Democrats don't get to have a say and they can write their own memo and they can go through the process of trying to get it released. Do you expect to see that soon?
I think we will, because I think what actually we're seeing today is more questions being raised and the idea that we need more transparency. Because the fact of the matter is, if these facts stand, that a dossier that was unverified was a key part of getting surveillance of Carter Page and perhaps other Trump officials he was talking to, that is obviously a real problem, potentially. But we need to know, was the dossier just 5% or 10% of what the FISA judge saw before the warrants? Is Devin Nunes giving us just a small part of the picture? Because as you know, from the Bush days, it's a high bar to get a FISA warrant.
Well, and also, even if it was just 5 or 10% of the FISA application that is based on the dossier, if they did indeed withhold information from the judge or others up the chain at the FBI, that who paid for it, and that Steele was obviously biased in things that he said, then we need to know that too.
Yes, because then it's not just a political story. It's not just about political bias against President Trump. It's, did senior people at the FBI and the Justice Department break the law? I mean, I think sometimes we have to take a step back from these things. We're reporting out the facts, and that's what we're supposed to do. Then you say, wait a second, everyone's talking about the political football. What does this mean for Donald Trump? What does it mean for the Robert Mueller investigation? What does it mean, hold on a second, about whether or not the people we trust at the FBI and the Justice Department followed the law or broke the law? We don't know the answer to that question. We have to stick to the facts. But this is raising sharp questions about that.
And that's what Speaker Ryan was trying to say yesterday in West Virginia, that the congressional branch has responsibility to pursue oversight of the executive, and that this is what this is.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that you had all these people at the FBI and the Justice Department and outside people like former Director James Comey tweeting about how this would be so devastating to national security. I challenge anyone who's read this, and we've all been reading and rereading, there's nothing so far we've seen in this memo that damages our national security.
Right.
So
maybe they took that out? I don't know.
Well, the White House is saying there were no redactions from what they had. Now, there were those changes that Devin Nunes made that Adam Schiff, the top Democrat, said were material changes. They said, no, they were grammatical. So we have to dig into that. But the bottom line here, I think, is the fact that Comey and others were saying this was going to damage national security. It makes you wonder whether they were more worried about kind of CYA and potential malfeasance and not national security.
Well, and then what do you think happens with Rod Rosenstein? He's the Deputy Attorney General. Some have wondered if this is going to be the basis on which President Trump decides to finally fire him. The president said today, he said, I'll let you figure that out. And when you ask a president, do you have confidence in so-and-so? And he says, I'll let you figure that out. If you don't say yes, then there's no confidence.
He didn't say yes. And also, I think the previous sentence or two was the president saying this is despicable, disgraceful, some version of that in terms of what's in the memo.
Could it be, let's just say, hypothetically, I hate hypotheticals, but let's just say, if the judge was lied to about or withheld information about who was paying for it, where this information came from, what's to say that Rod Rosenstein didn't get information where that was redacted too, or held back? I mean, it could be that maybe he was not given full information.
He might have been in the dark, but that obviously will raise questions about why he was kept in the dark. You're the Deputy Attorney General. You should know this before you sign a piece of paper saying, I want a FISA warrant. And also, I was talking to Martha McCallum off the air. I'm going to be on with her tonight at 7, and she was basically asking a very good question as well, which is, did the judge, the FISA judge, ask the right questions, or was this a rubber stamp? Because maybe people thought,
FBI agents I talked to today said it's impossible to get a rubber stamp, that this is not a process where you're able to do that. When you say, you can't say it's a high bar and a rubber stamp. Committee memo putting the spotlight on the surveillance of a former Trump campaign advisor, and one news organization says it's as if everyone is describing in detail a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle after looking at a couple dozen of its pieces.
Shepard Smith on the Fox News deck will have the latest reaction after President Trump decided to allow the release of the Republican memo. We'll break it down with the Fox News Sunday anchor, Chris Wallace. Plus, lawyers for a former Trump advisor facing charges in the Russia investigation say they want to quit the case. I'll speak with a former federal prosecutor about whether that means Rick Gates may be getting ready to spill some information and what that could mean for his co-defendant, the former Trump campaign manager or chairman, Paul Manafort. There's a little news today. We'll have it for you top of the hour on Shepard Smith Reporting. See you then.
So let's talk about the politics of the memo. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes made changes before sending it to President Trump. That, according to Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. The Democrats saying important information was left out of this GOP memo. Let's bring in Steve Hayes, the editor-in-chief for the Weekly Standard. He's also a Fox News contributor. Steve, you tweeted that you noticed that on a second read of the memo, you didn't see what the Democrats were claiming, is that there was going to be big national security implications if this memo was released.
Right. I think if you actually look at the memo itself and what the memo itself says, the Democratic attempts to prebut it and to claim that this would do grave damage to U.S. national security, echoed, I should say, by members of the intelligence community and federal law enforcement, it just isn't there. I mean, you don't see it in the actual text of the memo itself. Now, what they could have been referring to is the idea that by making things like this public, it makes our liaison intelligence services less likely to provide information for us if they think that the information they're providing is somehow going to make its way to the public domain here in the United States. But there wasn't anything in the memo that struck me as particularly sensitive.
Have you heard from any of your sources? I know you cover a lot of national security issues that are concerned about the alleged abuses in this memo, or any concerns about what this could do to impede the current cases?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think you could help but being concerned about what's in the memo. I mean, the charges that are made in the memo, if they stand up to scrutiny when we look at, presumably we get a chance to look at the other FISA affidavits and the long list of documents that are supporting this memo, you have to be troubled by that. I'm very interested to see what the Democratic response is. I would love to see a response from the FBI. Remember, the FBI raised alarms about this memo beforehand, said it was factually inaccurate, made material omissions. A little bit ironic for the FBI to be accusing this document of making material omissions when the FBI itself seems to have made some. But I'd like to see a response from the FBI to the extent that it's possible, and where they can't answer because of sources or methods, they ought to make that clear. But it would be very interesting to see them try to poke holes in this and give us a broader understanding of exactly what went on here.
Let me get your take on something, because a lot of, including me, I have said, well, let's see the Republican memo, let's see the Democratic memo, and the White House just said that they will help the Democrats go through the process, just like they did with the Republicans, to make sure that their memo can be released. But if we also call for the underlying FISA applications, would we be asking for the ones not just from 2016, but going all the way back to 2013, which is apparently when Carter Page was first put on this list? I don't know if do we need to see all of that, or is it important to keep the integrity of the Justice Department and the FBI what it is, and they're secret for a reason?
Well, here's what makes this so difficult. I mean, on the one hand, if you're arguing about this in the abstract and you're talking about making a determination about who's making a stronger case in public and who's got the better political argument, of course, you'd like as much information as is humanly possible to be put in the hands of the American people who are ultimately going to judge this. But this is taking place in the midst of a serious ongoing investigation, some of the supporting material for which it comes out of these FISA applications. So I think you do have to be careful not to put out information that could somehow jeopardize or derail the Mueller investigation. But at the same time, the more information that the American people have, the better we're able to understand. Look, what we seem to be looking at here is cherry-picked information from everybody on all sides. And that should bother anybody who actually cares about getting to the truth and finding out what actually happened here.
Is that what you were referring to in the piece today in the Weekly Standard of the 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and we just have about a dozen pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. This is like a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. People are describing it before the memo in a way that they're looking at a piece here or a piece there or a handful of pieces that come from all different parts of the jigsaw puzzle and trying to tell everybody what the picture was. It's not possible to do that. Now, I think this adds some new information, helps fill out that picture. I think the Democratic response will likely do the same thing. I would like to see something from the FBI. We're going to continue to learn more and fill this picture out. I'm just not sure. I mean, we're at a time where polarization is so steep that will people budge from their positions even if they can see the entire picture? I'm nervous about that.
All right. Steve Hayes, thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
So the Nunes memo is now out. What will that mean for President Trump's relation with the FBI? That's up next. The release of that House Intelligence Committee memo raising questions about the president's relationship with Christopher Wray, the head of the nation's top law enforcement agency. Wray had reportedly called the possible release of the Nunes memo extremely reckless. Jonathan Swan is a national political reporter for Axios. Have you had any updated information since the memo was released, Jonathan?
Nothing that would suggest there was scuttlebutt that he was considering resigning. From both the White House and the Justice Department, people tell me that that's not true, and I haven't heard anything since the release of the memo to suggest that anything like that would happen. Well,
and we have had indication not just from the White House, but also from Capitol Hill and the FBI Agents Association, all declaring their support of the FBI director. So I would think that if he was to, it would be unusual to resign after that.
That's right. That's right.
What about the president's relationship with Rod Rosenstein? I see that there is a conservative group, the Tea Party Patriots, have just gone up with a big ad buy calling on Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to do his job or resign. Why is that important?
Well, it's important because it's sort of the canary, as I wrote, the canary in the right-wing coal mine, which is this is a view shared by a lot of movement conservatives, and it's a view, frankly, shared by the president. The president privately has had big problems with Rod Rosenstein for many months. We're starting to see now that come out in public. He said the most important quote today was the president saying, "You figure it out," when he was asked whether he still had confidence in Rod Rosenstein or whether this supported a case to fire him. And this group coming out with this ad, while the ad in and of itself, you know, it's just one ad from one conservative group, I wouldn't be surprised if other conservative groups come out and push this message.
Yeah.
One movement leader I spoke to this morning said that the one thing unifying conservatives at the moment is this guy, Rod Rosenstein.
It's kind of unusual for the groups to just do that without any sort of push from somewhere else also, I would imagine. But maybe we'll find that out in the future. Wonder if you could tell me about what it's like within the White House right now, because they've had such a good end to 2017. 2017 was controversial and consequential, and the president is a disruptor, and so we were all reading Axios 20 times a day to try to figure out what's going on, reporting it here on Fox News. Then the president had the great tax reform bill, all the good economic news, a good State of the Union, and they have the budget coming out on February 12th. So with all of that going on, how much time and space is this issue taking up, the whole Mueller investigation, the FBI issue? I know that they're able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm just curious about the mindset at the White House right now.
Well, it was only a fairly small group involved in the decision-making with this memo, but I will say that for most people in the White House whose names are not Donald J. Trump, they viewed, and who had exposure to this memo or briefed on the memo, their concern, as we reported, was that it was going to be a flop. It wasn't going to be the kill shot or the slam dunk that it was portrayed to be by Republicans in the House. But Trump himself never lost the enthusiasm for the document. As soon as he heard about it, before he'd even seen it or read it, he wanted it out there. So this was ultimately the will of the president, whereas there were some skeptical people inside the White House.
Do you have any insight into what they're planning next week before they release the budget on the 12th? Because that is a serious policy document and will tell us a lot about what they're planning for 2018 before they head into that difficult midterm election.
Well, one thing that they are, and Gary Cohn presented on it yesterday to Republicans at their retreat, is infrastructure. Their next legislative rollout will be infrastructure. I don't know whether it will come before the budget. I'm told it will come in the next few weeks. But really, I mean, this year's dealing with the midterms, it's dealing with the government funding and all of these other crises like the DACA negotiations. Most people internally don't think they're going to get an infrastructure.
Daily briefing.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.